Let's start with Daniel. Um, just a couple of words before we start. So we had a session up front where we kind of like discussed like, is there anything where we agreed, like don't agree, and in the end we ended up with the question: can we empower teams to perform pragmatic research that actually improves products? And this is where at least we had like two different perspectives. It's not actually that we're like completely contradicting, but let's see. And I'm super curious about Daniel's point of view. Daniel was actually speaking at Push Conference like 4 years ago. Oof, I forgot. Back then, you have been part at Google Ventures on a stage talking about design sprints. Meanwhile, lots of things have changed. And then and Indi is basically, I just know your books so far. and many people say like, okay, if I talk to user researchers and ask them, can you tell me a good book about research? Like what would be the one book I should get started? Or what are like cool people to follow? Your name is always on the list. It's like always, yeah, Indi Young, go for Indi Young. That's the go-to thingy. So I was like, we need Indi here. So okay, enough said from my side. Daniel, it's your turn. I think Indi, you can. I will also remove myself from the stage so far, and then just go ahead, and then we join back.
Okay.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Thomas. And it's a thrill to be on stage with Indi. You know, you're somebody I've always admired for a long time, Indi. So it's really cool. So let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. All right. Okay. My name's Daniel Burka. As Thomas said, I used to be a design partner at Google's venture capital fund, GV. And I left 3 years ago to join a not-for-profit called Resolve to Save Lives, which is run by the former director of the Centers for Disease Control under President Obama, this guy named Dr. Tom Frieden. And what we work on is large-scale hypertension control programs. So hypertension, high blood pressure, is the biggest killer in the world. You know, we all think high blood pressure is normal. Something like 20% of adults in Europe or North America have high blood pressure. And it's the leading indicator for heart attacks and strokes. And we all also think heart attacks and strokes are normal because, you know, everybody has an uncle or an aunt or a grandparent who has had a heart attack or a stroke. But it doesn't have to be that way. In countries that have good hypertension control, they've significantly reduced deaths from heart attacks and strokes. And this in large, low and middle income countries, places with rising prevalence of hypertension like India and China, you can reduce deaths by 30 million people over, 100 million people over the next 30 years. So how does software get involved in a public health program? And how do we use user research in order to succeed? I did intend this to be in the edit version because then I can see my slides. I hope that's okay. I can see the chat. So if you're going to run a large hypertension control program, you need to be measuring every patient's blood pressure who comes to a hospital and create feedback loops from that data that informs patients about their own health, the medical staff and medical officers to treat that patient well. And then even more importantly, from a public health perspective, all the way up to officials and managers at the state and district levels who can make changes into the health system in order to improve hypertension control. And then to the epi teams who can help them do that. Sorry, epidemiological teams. So as you can see, the software that we're creating has many types of users. Everything from patients to healthcare workers to government officials to epidemiologists. There's two main parts of Simple. On the first part is an Android app for data entry that is used by healthcare workers. And the other part is a system of dashboards that creates graphs and charts that help the epidemiologists and healthcare managers to see what's happening on the ground. The big challenge is that the places where we're working, a patient visit takes about 3 minutes. In Bangladesh, a typical patient visit is around 2 minutes. If you're from Western Europe or North America, a typical patient visit is 10 to 15 minutes. As you can see, it's a huge time shift. And if a healthcare worker only has 2 or 3 minutes with a patient, we can't expect them to spend more than about 15 or 20 seconds doing any data entry during that patient visit. This is a picture of a typical small village clinic in India. This is in Punjab in the north of India, and I'm getting my blood pressure taken by a nurse in the sub-center. So the way it works is she'll take my blood pressure, she'll advise me on my hypertension, she'll enter my blood pressure into Simple, and then she'll give me my medicines to treat my hypertension and mark those in Simple as well, and then tell me to come back in 30 days and mark that in the app. For a follow-up patient, she can do all of this in 15 seconds. That's our current median time for patient treatment. This is even more critical in a large facility like this in Bangladesh. This is an Ubazilla Health Complex in Bangladesh, where there are very long lines, and they'll see 200 patients in a single day. So they're treating a patient in an extremely rapid environment. Today, Simple is deployed in over 2,000 health facilities to record over 500,000 patients in Ethiopia, India, and Bangladesh. That's just a drop in the bucket. So as you can imagine, just in India, there's 200 million hypertensive people. And so if we're going to succeed with software to manage those people, it's got to succeed across a huge range of environments. You know, if you've ever been to India, the one constant about India is that it's heterogeneous. Everything's different no matter where you go. We're not for profit. So this isn't like Google where we've got giant teams, but I do over-index in research. We've got 4 user researchers. 2 of them are part-time product designers, part-time researchers, and 2 dedicated researchers. Our team is mostly in India, and we recently put a user researcher in Ethiopia. And what are they doing? So the secret to our success so far is that we really use what I think of as 3 buckets of research. We are doing, 2 million with hypertensive in India. That's 200 million. It's much more than you think, Thomas. So we do 3 types of user research in broad buckets. The first type is foundational. We do lots of observations in the field. We watch healthcare workers using the software and doing their jobs, because of course, if you're a healthcare worker, doing data entry is a tiny piece of your overall workflow. And we need to make sure that we're successful within the entire context of the clinic. We do longitudinal studies. So we're constantly talking to users and finding out what's working and what's not working in the moment. We do interviews with field teams, and we do diary studies. This type of research is happening all the time, but primarily we over-index it before we start any specific project. So if there's data that we need in order to inform a project, we do quite a bit of foundational research before we even start ideating on solutions. The next thing, and this is the crux of the type of research that we're doing, what I call scouting research, which is co-creation with healthcare workers themselves, and then testing lots of high fidelity prototypes. This is something I really took from the design sprint method that we developed at Google Ventures. We're constantly running out in front of the engineering teams with high fidelity prototypes and trying them with users in the field. And these are either lightly coded prototypes or things like Protopie or Figma prototypes. And then later in the actual process, we do usability testing once we already have a pretty good idea of what we think we should be doing. And of course, we do a lot of feedback loop research. So after it's in the field, we're looking at what's been working and what's not working, and in order to come back around the loop and iterate and improve. And most of all, the development process comes in around halfway into this process. So we overinvest at the beginning I shouldn't say overinvest, we invest heavily at the beginning into foundational research to understand what we're doing. We have high fidelity prototypes pretty well tested with users and have quite a bit of feedback from usually 15 or 20 users in the field before we hit development. And that way we're not wasting our engineering resources. We have to be pretty stingy with our engineering resources, and we'll hit a project with a pretty high level of confidence that it will succeed before we even start writing a line of code. And that's an overview of how we do pragmatic, functional research that is really, really informing a practical development process on Simple. Thanks.
Your turn. I think you are muted.
Hi. My bad. Daniel, that was really inspiring. I think I need to look into hypertension myself. The response that I'm going to give is going to start with kind of a yes and. So what Daniel is doing with his research team is spot on. But I would like to be able to take our design maturity and our digital maturity, our development maturity to the next stage. I think we've come from a place where we were designing to process. Now we're designing to human and doing co-creation with them. But we're still missing a lot of the parts and a lot of the opportunities. Just to use Daniel's example, there are probably hundreds of thousands more people who can't even get into the clinic, who have issues with hypertension. And perhaps it's a long walk or bike ride or drive. Perhaps it's somebody who can't get out of the house or has too many other things going on. And can't even see the people that he is supporting, those clinicians and the epidemiologists. So what I am going to posit is that we're at a good spot, but let's get better. Let's seek out the people that we haven't been paying attention to, kind of like recognize that we've got blind spots, and those blind spots are being perpetuated by the design thinking or agile or jobs to be done processes that we're following. I would like the foundational research to be a little bit more broad so that we can get more perspectives. And some of the things that I see that are missing are depth. Observing someone, asking them only questions that have to do with looking through the narrow aperture of our understanding of the problem and our solution doesn't get us the breadth that we need. It also doesn't get us the depth that we need. I'm going to come back and talk about that a little bit too. Also, Daniel's team's probably on top of this, but I see a lot of teams who do anecdotal research. That means you get a story from one person, a story from another person. They're pretty different. And you like go with it. You're like, yeah, okay, so these are our takeaways. There's no patterns there. And patterns are what define valid qualitative research. So I'd like to see us pay more attention to patterns. And I'd also like to see more balance across different types of research. Often, you come into a team and the team has like a really good skill set around one kind of data collection or two kinds of data collection, and there can be more. And then finally, I also just want to talk a little bit about how ethically we just like go ahead and put something out there and let it harm people. And we can do a little bit better. We can do a little bit more upfront work. So with respect to depth, here's the slide that I typically use when you are having a conversation, when you're trying to listen to someone, when you're actually interviewing someone in your research, you're getting explanation, how something's done, what is the thing that's being done, maybe how that process became the way it is now. You get people's opinions and preferences about what they are doing with regard to the process. You get their statements of fact and, a little bit of context and scene setting and some, generalization, some talk about the future, conjecture, and you're not getting at their inner thinking. You're not getting an actual connection to that human. You're kind of taking a surface photograph of them and you're not getting into their mind. There's no telepathy server yet, so this is partially the reason why. But what we truly need to understand somebody and form cognitive empathy is their inner thinking, their guiding principles, how they make decisions, and their emotional reactions and what those set off, other emotional reactions, more thinking, a decision, that kind of a thing. And once we get to that level of depth, we have a much richer understanding of what people are dealing with as they try to get a purpose done. So patterns is the other thing I want to talk about, and that is all framed through purpose. So if you look in the center of this little diagram here, it's a person, just one person doing their purpose. The purpose is the thing you're interested in, perhaps tracking hypertension. That person may be doing it for people at a clinic. She may be doing it for someone in her family or people in her organization. And she has a lot of tools. So she's doing some inner thinking there. She's having emotional reactions. She's using her guiding principles to make judgments about her purpose, whatever her purpose is. But that dial around them, that you've got social tools, you've got manual tools, you've got other digital tools. There's all sorts of other ways that you complete that purpose. And your purpose might not just be, collect the data of hypertension, but perhaps reassure people that there can be something they can do about it, or perhaps even larger, there can be all sorts of different levels of granularity, make a change like what Daniel's team is trying to do with respect to an entire systemic change within a country and across different countries in the globe. The interesting thing is that we just take that, our org might be that one at the bottom, and we just take that little slice and look at that person through our little slice without looking at all the other things that they're doing and everything else that's going through their mind. So we need to deepen our knowledge creation. This is a quick slide where, a lot of people do market research and they get targeting out of that. What we really want to do is opportunity research. I think Daniel was calling that foundation, generative research and evaluative research. And we want to be able to make some changes, help some people, support them, understand where our bias is, understand where our blind spots are, give a broader perspective to our team so we can make better support for people. And even recognize different thinking styles. The clinicians, the epidemiologists, they come to their work with different philosophic approaches. So a thinking style is really important. Also, that little line where it says people's purpose, that's the lens through which we need to do all of this research. We need to frame it by a purpose because we want patterns to come together. Here's a slide that I've been putting out on Twitter that you can download from there, where I kind of describe exactly what the details are. I'm not going to dwell on this one. You can go and grab it. I just wanted to let you know that it exists out there. There's a really fun exercise you can do with your team by circling the different things that you actually do to get an understanding of where you stand with respect to all the possibilities. But back to patterns. What you see here is called an opportunity map. The top half is a mental model diagram. And the taller the towers, it means the more people are talking about this thing. That means there's patterns there. Those little short towers is not really a pattern yet. This kind of data is longitudinal. It isn't necessarily longitudinal with the same people, but it lasts for decades. I have clients with 20-year-old sets of data that they keep adding to over time and growing. So this becomes your map. The patterns are what makes it valid. And what we do is in each of those towers is the voice of a person. We write it, it's a summary of either inner thinking, an emotional reaction, or a guiding principle. And we build from the bottom up so that we're hearing other people's perspectives and not curating our bias onto it by accident. So this is really important to be able to pull together because your own organization can align what you're doing instead of like looking through that aperture of your own solution to what everything that people are doing to try to get that larger purpose done. And you can start to see more opportunities. More importantly, there's that thing off to the left that I call thinking styles. You can start to measure yourself based on whether you're doing different types of solutions for different philosophic approaches to a problem. So yeah, you have to start somewhere. It's vast, all the purposes. Just map out what you've got right now. And ask yourselves, well, what do we need to know? What are the things that we're not seeing? That's an interesting question. Not a lot of us pause to ask that question. That's where the ethics sort of come in. And then ask yourselves, what's the risk of not knowing this? It's possible it's not risky. And you can go look at another thing. But if it is risky, this is when we think, okay, which tools do we use to build knowledge? Which of those tools from that diagram that I just flipped past will help us here? So I think that is my 7 minutes. Am I right, Thomas?
All good. Thank you very much, Indi. Where should we start? Daniel, was there anything from what Indi has shown? I mean, I saw you nodding a lot. Was there anything where you see something different? I can't hear. You are muted. Sorry. Now we can go. Yeah. Muted again? Why are you muted again?
Yeah, why? Maybe his phone microphone came off.
Now it works. No, yeah, it works. Okay.
All right, now I can speak my mind. The one thing I struggle with what Indi's showing, and I agree with broad strokes of what Indi's presentation, but my research team, I'm obviously supportive of my research team and I love them and we do lots of great work together. But sometimes they go off and they'll do something like that big map you just made. They're like, oh, we're doing an empathy map or exercise of where all the risk is in the project. And part of me looks at it and is just like, and it's like 1,000 things, right? So it looks a lot like the graph you were showing. It's like, oh, we don't know this about pharmacists. We don't know this about, this other group. And it's 1,000 things. And part of me is just like, for fuck's sake, like we're trying to solve something really hard. There is a huge amount of uncertainty. You just need to embrace parts of it and just keep going. And that really frustrates the research team because they're like, oh, no one cares about my, my concerns. And I was like, my concerns is this project not cratering. Like how do you balance like bringing to leadership a huge slide of risks? And they're like, oh my God, I'm very aware that we could crash and burn tomorrow. Like, thanks for nothing.
Right. Well, I think there's two parts to that. One is the yes and response, which I find very powerful because what they've done is it's just a picture of the future. It's just that I'm in the fog here and we're trying to sketch out a few details so we can see, use those kind of as wayfinding signs. It doesn't mean you have to focus on those pharmacists right now. But I think what I'm sensing is that like these people went off and did this without your awareness maybe. And it seems like it was time that could have been spent on something that is more tactical. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think I'm showing, initiative, and it's not like they wasted a week on it. It's just like they come to you and they want you to take action on it, and you're like, I even saw the questions in the chat. A bunch of the participants here are asking like, India's a huge place. How can you possibly know? And you're like, I don't. I try to de-risk as much as possible, and I try to pursue the largest opportunities that I can. But you're, as an entrepreneur, I know this as an entrepreneur, and I know this now as a head of product. You're constantly terrified that you don't know what you're doing, but you have to know what you're doing.
So one of the things when you're in the situation that you are in, as opposed to like at Google where you have millions of dollars, right?
Google.
Yeah, cratering is different there, right? Is that this kind of information, this kind of map, so to speak, this kind of sketching out a little bit more of the things you don't see allows you to pivot more quickly. So if something does crater, you have immediately other thoughts in mind. So I think that the value with it, and I've seen 1 or 2 companies do that, use that for pivoting. Others haven't had to pivot, so that's kind of nice. But I think that that's a really valuable part of it, is that rather than seeing it as they're asking me to do something, it's, oh, this is great feathering for our nest. If we are a startup, say the analogy is a bird's nest, right? It's scrappy. It's just got a few twigs. It's in the shape of a circle. And so what, yes, we want it to be a real nest eventually. And why are you bringing feathers already? Feathers are going to be needed eventually. You might need, I mean, maybe they're not bringing feathers, maybe they're bringing some other bit of it, but it's like, yeah, it's nice to have that on hand. I don't think that it is a problem, but tell me more about this attitude that I hear you talking about. Like they want me to do something about it, or they feel like I'm not paying attention to their thing.
I mean, even at Google, I met so many researchers who said no one listens to me. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, designers maybe 10 or 12 years ago used to be like, oh, no one listens to design, it's all engineering and product driven. No one listens to me. I need a seat at the table. That really went away 5, 6, 7 years ago. Most designers now have kind of more power than they know what to do with. That's a whole other debate.
That's
yeah.
You can call.
I'm printing T-shirts today, like with quotes, like like that. Okay.
But research, I think, they think in a way that often isn't aligned very well. I shouldn't say it's not aligned with the language they use, and their approach is very different from product managers and entrepreneurs. And I'm careful to say it's not in a bad way. It's just very different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I remember I worked with Michael Margolis at Google Ventures, and his attitude was always about risk. How do we de-risk everything? Like, oh my goodness, like it's terrifying. We may not succeed. Whereas an entrepreneur is only thinking about success. It's like, how do we make the chart go up and to the right? It's not like fear of failure as much as it's like, how do we get to success more quickly?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that leads to a real clash of interest.
So remember that thing I said about guiding principles? Understanding at depth somebody's inner thinking, emotional reactions, and guiding principles toward the purpose. You all share a purpose. And I've seen this over and over and over again. The people who are in product or who are leading the little group of founders or whatever, tend to come from a business background, a background of, getting something up and running, getting it successful. Maybe success means profit, maybe success means change for the better, right? Or maybe sometimes it means the two of them together. And the things, this goes back to that same old academic argument that happened 30 years ago, where it's like, in business world, you're taught to pay attention to different things than if you come up through a different part of the academic world, where, say, user research might come from, where it's like, let's understand, let's take our time to understand, let's make sure we know more of the things. So one of the things I tell a lot of people,
that's exactly the attitude.
And so
let's take our time.
Yeah, let's take our time. Let's know.
That's not.
So there's
the entrepreneurs, like, how do we get there quickly?
And that's fine. You have to work together. I think the important part is that you understand each other and talk about each other's guiding principles. some of the work that I do with clients is to help them recognize when you're speaking at surface, when you're speaking to each other at depth, what your emotional reactions are, and discover what those guiding principles are. Recognize them in each other and start your conversations with the guiding principle. Hey, I know that you're aimed at this, and so that means next Tuesday you need this to happen. I'm aimed in this other direction, but because you're all about next Tuesday, I'm gonna sort of focus there. But after that, I want you to take a look at this thing that I'm looking at for next September. Just briefly, and it's kind of like a back and forth. You both know each other's guiding principles. Then I think I don't have a lot of stories yet about how this is working, but the idea is that the more you understand each other's guiding principles and lead with those, the more collaboration can happen, the more swinging back and forth and sort of seeing from each other's perspective is really going to, I think, help in that situation. And I wonder if anybody in our audience has examples either of like the whole butting heads, we're never going to get anywhere because we can't see from each other's point of view, versus being able to see. And Daniel, you look like you have something to say too.
But before Daniel starts, I just sorry to interrupt you guys. I just wanted to say that Indi made a very good mark here. Now it's time for everyone. So Daniel, while you speak, I will let people on the stage already. So we have a group discussion or a group debate going on. That would be great. But yeah, finish your thought.
It looks like they want me to state the question. It's basically, I'm looking for stories where that embody what Daniel's been facing, where two guiding principles make it feel like you're not working well together, or where you've recognized these other guiding principles and you've had this sort of like, oh yeah, let's play in your sandbox, and then this sandbox, we've got these sort of areas that we're focusing on. Does that help clarify?
Still, I would really like to take this quote from Daniel you mentioned before, and I'm really wondering why there was no like people saying like, what? How can you say that? Like designers nowadays have more power than they know what to do with it, and who agrees? And there was nothing like, what are you saying or something like that. I don't know. It's interesting. So I expected some people like shouting and saying like, what? But
from experience, I can totally disagree. So I can bring into this discussion.
No, I mean, we had this talk. I remember 3 years ago at Push Conference, or 2 years. Designers have a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. This talk, right? And this is true. And suddenly people are listening more to designers. But what are designers doing with this power, right? Yeah, can you even handle the power? That's actually a good question. But there's Bennett and there's Sebastian. I'm pretty sure, at least I know Sebastian very well, that he has a opinion on that.
Oh, all right, the pressure's on. So I think what I found super interesting here is that Daniel, you come more from a place where you say, all right, let's get shit done, right? So let's not waste too much time of de-risking too much, but rather accept that we don't know everything. And I think from my point of view, the biggest question is always, can you align on how long we gotta diverge before we converge into an actual solution? And what I quite often found is, if you and I will make probably like a very unpopular thought, but if you leave UX people who are like by default very curious, right? too long alone with that diverging, you get all kinds of stuff, and it's like super interesting insight, but you don't get to a solution that you can actually push out. And the question is, how can you make sure that you agree on how long do we venture out before we come up with like a proper solution?
But arguably, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. He asked you, but I have an answer too.
I was going to say, I think the biggest challenge is, diverging in the kind of normal design sense is a bunch of designers fiddling in Figma or Sketch. And in some ways, it's just design masturbation. It's just like, oh, I tried 100 things. I don't give a fuck if you tried 100 things. Like, did you try them with users in the field? Like, get to a prototype, get it in front of people, and then you realize if your genius is actually genius, and it's usually not. So I think that's the problem, is if you're diverging just in your little design office and not actually getting out in front of real people, your actual users, as much as possible, you can just kind of diverge infinitely. And I see lots of teams doing that. They figured out the perfect curvature of the buttons and the perfect grid format. F that stuff. Like, get the basics in place and get it in front of people. Right, Indy?
Now, what you said makes me think of something else. But the question isn't how long. Now, a design sprint, okay, that's in the solution space. You're making up ideas. I'm not going to get involved in that. I'm not interested in that so much as making sure that what we bring to the design sprint is broader, that supports more people, that does less harm. We have a lot of design out there that it even does systemic harm. Think of the facial recognition software out there that's being used to arrest innocent people. That's systemic level harm. There's harm in other ways as well. And I think that it could be even as little as frustration, even as little as like, oh, obviously this isn't built for me, but I have to use it. And I think that my point is there's another level that we need to push toward. I want us to be more connected, like Daniel wants, to the people by understanding them more deeply. Just going out and doing that once a year, once every other year, you're going to collect a whole lot of stuff that you're not going to be able to deal with for 5 years. So maybe you don't need to do it again for 5 years. But this is the cadence that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about making this foundational part of your cyclical design and development cycle. Okay, so that's what I mean when you understand each other's guiding principles. It's like, yeah, that long-term stuff is long-term stuff. We don't do it all the time. Yet, if we don't do it ever, we're going to keep making one product that everybody has to use and it fits nobody and it actually harms people. There might be, I mean, just to use the hypertension example, there might be people out there who think of blood pressure and think of their health completely differently than the way your app does it, even healthcare professionals. And maybe they use it incorrectly. They report the wrong things. The bad data gets in there, right? Something like that could happen. And if that's not even on your map, if that's not even part of what you're aware of, yeah, you might not deal with it right now, but at least you know that what you're dealing with is aimed at a very specific thinking style and a very specific part of that, and there's bigger parts to it.
Yeah. I think this is something, that a lot of people miss, Indy, is the different times for different research. Because like what you're talking about, if you like you look at your slides earlier, if you did that every week, like it'd be ridiculous. Yeah. But I totally dig it. Like this is the same with design sprints. Like when we were doing design sprints, people are like, do you do these every 2 weeks? And you're like, oh my God, no. Like maybe once a quarter. Like it's exhausting and it's like not a good use of time. So I think building up this, there are some things we do over long cadences, and then there are things we do every day, and then I think that's so important on design and research team.
I mean,
Yeah, that's possibly getting lost. Go ahead.
I find this super interesting because I mean, what you were talking about earlier, Daniel, was like this one extreme that you're basically refining a design that you have never shown to users. And then what I also saw on the other extreme is that people go and do half a year of interviews and research in a field that has been established for 100 years, right? So there's just like, oh my God, there's like 10 competitors out there who have been doing that for 100 years. Let's take that and see how we can improve upon that. But no, we know nothing. And that's why we have to search. I think my question, maybe I should have specified that a lot, that kind of tends towards the direction, because what I see is that we are kind of tilting to the other extreme now, where it's not about, we haven't shown it to users, but we are showing it to like 10,000 users, like completely over exaggerating here, but 10,000 users in personal interviews. And we are still not 100% sure if this is really the solution we should go for, or whether we should try the 101st solution and we should show them again, right? So I don't know where. No, I mean, I'm over exaggerating. No, I know.
Holy smokes!
Now, but I mean,
He's on purpose.
It's I mean, you get where I'm coming from, right? So that you are basically coming from a point where you think you know everything to a point where you always say we know nothing, which is not exactly true in most cases, right?
No, I think some people are asking questions like this in the chat when I was talking. It's like, India's a big heterogeneous place. How can you know anything? And you're like, I need to know somewhere between not knowing anything and knowing everything about every person in a clinic. Like, there's no way I'm ever going to get here, but I better be pretty far from knowing nothing. You know, so it's really about finding that error, that level of risk, and that level of, you know, especially in health, from an ethical standpoint, as Indy's saying, like this level where we feel like we've got our confidence level high enough that we can succeed and not hurt
Sebastian,
people.
I think that there's you were talking about user research, where we're talking about having a solution and interacting with somebody about that solution. And what I was talking about earlier is purpose research. So we're not talking about a solution, we're talking about somebody trying to accomplish something, just so we can discover like the parts that we're not seeing. That's the thing that I'm talking about doing once every couple of years. And when I do that research, it takes about a month and a half, 2 months, but it's not full time. That's 10 hours a week per researcher on a team, so that it's not like an interregnum between research projects, because you've got things you have to get done. But this idea of purpose, I just want to throw that back out there. I think I see a lot of people forgetting to frame their studies that way. And then we end up with wasted time, wasted research. The results coming back from it, they don't hang together. There's no patterns. And so the researchers are like, okay, it's because I was in a hurry and I was kind of forced to do this. And so, you know, me coming from this background, this academic background where I like to have time, you're forcing me to go fast. And so I didn't frame it right. And so here's the shit data that I'm going to give you. And there's some insights from 1 or 2 people, and no patterns. So that, I think, is the part of the problem, is that if we're not talking to one another across teams and understanding and recognizing and respecting the differences, and then, okay, yeah, now that we've got that out in the air, now let's talk about what we need to get done now, and where, you know, which thing we should work on right now and where it fits in the whole cadence of things.
I have to make a short announcement. The next session would be starting.
Uh-oh.
But just stay here, continue the discussion,
these
please.
handwritten signs.
I really enjoyed that right now. So, just go for it. Oh, damn it. No, I broke it.
You did. You broke it.
I think maybe there were other questions, but in short, 100% agreed. Thank you for differentiating there. But yeah, that was exactly a bit my point, right? So how often do you have to do it, and how long do you have to dive into that, right? And if it's like 1.5 months every 3 years, that's absolutely reasonable. But I guess like 6 months before you get anything going is like super unreasonable. Yeah.
Yes, unreasonable.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, can I just oh no.
I really like that point you made, Indi.
Okay. I just
sorry, go ahead.
one quick question, because I think this overlapping thing is kind of hard. The question basically was, designers have too much power, and my experience is, maybe that's because I made a lot of experience with German companies. There aren't any designers. Most of startups in Germany, as far as I'm concerned, maybe I wasn't a good one, I don't know. But it's like treated like an unwanted child. It's like, okay, yeah, at some point, yeah, we have this product now, and we're kind of in the market, and we make some money, but we're still funded. But and then yeah, we need to get a designer now. I can't tell why. Like, that's not me talking. It's like the founders or the entrepreneurs talking, and they go like, yeah, I think we need it now, because now at some point you needed it at the start where you hadn't had a company. That's why I get angry about that. Not because I'm a designer, because I like to work with design guys. And that's the kind of how do you get a organization? How do you get a company from the head start to change their mind on how important that kind of stuff is, and how do you, or not important, but how do you get them to that it's not like optional, that it's like, okay, we can do it without them.
About 10 years behind Silicon Valley on that. I mean, there are lots of companies in Silicon Valley that don't value design, but there are quite a few that do now. There's lots of chief design officers and heads of user experience, these types of things. The first thing is, don't try to convince them. Like, join an organization that cares about design, or start your own organization. I mean, the guys from Airbnb did that. Someone like Mia, who joined early at Pinterest, did that. She brought that in early. Mia Bloom, right? So you can. I wouldn't try to change the direction of the ship. But my point wasn't that designers have too much power. My problem is that designers who do have power often don't know what to do with it. And so they're focusing on things like design systems and design craft instead of learning how a business operates and providing strategic direction for the business. Because that's really, I think, the power of design. Design can really inform the strategic direction of an organization to, one, function more ethically for its users, and two, make more money and succeed more. I mean, those things aren't in conflict with each other. And design can do these things, but most design leaders abdicate their responsibility for those things and focus on things that are obviously in the design realm, i.e.
I think to that
systems.
point, this goes right back to that relationship building. And relationship building is the thing that we lack. It's work, it's hard. It's really hard.
Considering design supposed to be empathetic, isn't it?
It's weird. We like to lob things at each other and not work with each other and understand each other. And that's the hard work. But that's the stuff that's going to make us successful, that's going to make our org sustainable, that's actually going to make a difference in the world. Is taking time to understand each other, understand each other's inner thinking, guiding principles. How can we work together? How do we fit this cadence together? We're both aimed at the same goal. And we'd like this not to crater. And yes, we know that there's other goals out there that we can aim at. And it's like, how is it? I can see how it's a problem, or how it can happen in a large organization, because people are like, I'm in my little cubby. I'm just going to do what I'm told. I want to rock the boat. I've heard people say that so many times. I don't want to rock the boat. And then I teach them some things, and then they go and rock the boat, and they make a difference. And they start building rapport with other people in the org. Yes.
Politics matter, right? Huh. It's so much easier to sit in your own little design, studio and like sit in your Eames chair and like
yeah,
move
but this is
pixels
what
around.
I wrote earlier in the chat, that we designers are so in the pity role that we always are like, oh, the team is not listening to us. We can't do user research. We don't have any money. We're in this whole thing into it. And so the rest of the company is also thinking like, oh yeah, those designers, just leave them alone in their little room. And this is really so funny. Yeah, but this is really the main point behind it, because I think to really have the same goal, you need a whole team that is engaged with the product and really wants to change something. And I experienced it a lot also in German companies, that there are really people which are just going to their 9-to-5 job, which would be fine if they really are into their work during that time. So I don't want to talk about later hours or something. So, but if the team is really engaged, and I experienced that as well, you can really shift something. And then it's like a self thingy that is going on where you can really say, okay, if this team is engaged like a team should be, then the question for what of this huge map of experiences of the users do we want to start with even is not a point, because at somehow it's working. I don't know how, if this is biological explained or if there's aliens behind it, I don't know, but at some point it's just like a self-going system which starts to run off. Why and how, I don't know, but this is what I experienced. So I don't know if you have similar experiences regarding that.
I would love to hear your story at some point, Madita. Maybe we can get on the phone at some point and I can help you unpack that and see if there are extraterrestrials behind it. But those are the kind of stories that we want, I think, more people to hear, to see them written, to see them spoken about, to see them clearly laid out. Because the work that I do is very linguistic. It's very clearly laying out, what are we saying to each other? What's the meaning? What are the concepts behind it? How do we agree on a concept and move things forwards and shift the world? Without understanding, we really can't do that. And so there is a way to break it down where you can all see the things that are there. It's not each interpretation, but each concept, and only the concepts at depth, and we ignore the stuff at the surface. So I think, I don't know, it would be interesting to hear your story and be able to break it down that way.
Can I put a new question, as long as my son is quietly sitting next to me? It points towards the actual title of the talk you guys were having. So talking about pragmatic research, I work for a company that actually provides research services to other companies. And we frequently meet two kinds of companies. One of them don't have any research maturity in their companies at all. And we need to convince them it doesn't make sense to think about that stuff. And on the other hand, we have companies that are very, 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 very academic in research, but in areas where it does not really make sense. So how do I make them be pragmatic? The ones that don't want to, but the other ones who do, but take it too seriously in that kind of sense. Do you have any suggestion on how to approach those things?
How is it that people reach out to you as an agency?
Well, in different ways. We have existing clients. They have dedicated market researchers. That would be the companies who are very mature in that stuff, have separate positions who take care of this and buy sort of service providers. But other like product teams who don't. Like they do stuff, they work and they do. And then they get the idea of, oh, we might need to test that, or we might need to talk to users.
Mm-hmm.
So,
is that product team within the same client that you are engaged with in the other division?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, right, yeah.
Two different companies.
Yeah, yeah. As a partner at Adaptive Path, one of the things that happened was we would get requests for proposals where people would say, we need to do X. And instead of writing back to them, I remember a really important one where they're like, we need to do X and Y. And I'm like, that will get you nowhere. I could sort of see a sparkle of where you want to go, let me get on the phone with you. Let me do a listening session with you. Let me try to get the deeper understanding. And then I wrote a proposal that had nothing to do with their RFP. It was different enough from everything because I had gotten on the phone with them to try to understand the depth. And that proposal stood out from all the others because it wasn't just a reflection of what they had already curated for themselves in terms of what they thought the solution needed to be. So that was, I mean, that's one way. There's, I think, a lot of other ways. It was either Bennett or Sebastian who'd asked earlier how to convince people, but they're just doing a sketch, like a blind sketch based on what people understand from customer service or from their market research, even a blind sketch of what the purpose is, and then a quick alignment of what we're actually doing with them automatically shows gaps. I know several people who have done that. They come into, they're buried inside of some big organization. They'll come into a meeting with this little blind sketch of what we think we know, right? It's wrong, but here's just what we think we know based on our data so far. And here's how we're supporting people. And you can immediately see gaps and weaknesses. And so that's pretty convincing too. And it's not usability too, by the way. It's all based on purpose.
Well, I was going to say, I think I probably agree with you pretty hard on this, Indi. Is at Google Ventures, my title at Google Ventures was design partner. So every time I met with an entrepreneur, the first thing that would come out of their mouth was like what their design challenges were. And they're always like whatever they thought of as design, logos or user interfaces or whatever. And then we talk about that for a minute, but then if the next question you ask them is what keeps you up at night?
Yes.
They like immediately start talking about things that aren't design. And then you're like, oh, okay, I'll tell you how design applies to that problem. Like that's your real problem. Like it's the thing that you worry about. It's usually like hiring and recruiting or, user retention or breaking into new markets. And I'm like, from my vantage point, I can see how to use these tools to solve those problems. And so, Louisa, I wonder if you can, if you have access to the people with power, you can ask them like, what are you actually trying to achieve? And then you're like, okay, the methods you're suggesting.
That phrase that you use, Daniel, what keeps you up at night, is one of my key phrases when I do a stakeholder. Yeah. It really resonates.
Yeah. Gives them all.
So what I learned as a UX designer within the team in a smaller space, that if the team is not convinced by a concept or whatever is standing behind it, to really ask them not why do you not like it or something like this, but more like what is your opinion on that and how would you solve it the other way? And then most of them are getting totally quiet because they start to think about it. What are the other ways? Okay, there you have this fail here, there you have this fail there. And this is when I started to explain, you see, and this is what all those sorts I've thought through. So now I can present you one of these solutions and we can discuss those because obviously nobody is perfect, but this is a smaller scale. So you can put the same process really on a management level. And I like this approach that it's in the end asking questions. So yeah, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. This is actually a great segue into maybe an example of looking at purpose. And Karina, I think you joined to.
Yeah, right. I was just thinking that if this might actually also be an example of how you get closer to the actual purpose to ask follow-up questions, for example.
Yeah, there are a lot of different purposes to explore. Even there was one that I did for a group who, in the United States, we have a law about hiring people with disabilities, and you have to adhere to that law or follow that law. And a lot of companies don't have somebody internally that understands all the laws and helps them adhere. So they need materials to help them understand what they need to do to to be within the law for hiring people with disabilities and keeping them on board. Well, that group wanted to understand more deeply. So we just did it was a 12-week study, 14-week study. And we had, I think, 12 participants. So these are very small, but we went to depth with each one of them. And basically it was like, you know, what's on your mind about this? And it wasn't just hiring. It was very much also about like proactively recognizing when someone's eyesight is going as they're aging. Right? It was also very proactively like setting up security systems, like if like manufacturing something leaks and everybody has to get out of the building, but let's make sure that the person who doesn't hear very well gets the message as well. And so you get all these other kinds of patterns coming out of that help, because you've asked them just sort of this purpose of, you know, what goes through your mind, and it's always what went through your mind that last time that you had to hire somebody and adhere to this rule. Another example, I did a series of 8 studies, one after the other, for an airline, because somehow the airline had money and a willing VP. And it was beautiful because the first purpose that we explored was because business travelers are their most important moneymaker. And market research said, okay, business travelers, those are people who are traveling short haul, short trips, you know, that kind of a thing. They had these little definitions around business traveler, but they only looked at them demographically. So what we did was we're like, okay, I'll take those demographics and recruit, but I'm not going to ask for somebody who's a business traveler. I'm just going to take those demographics. And from the recruiting, I asked the question, like, how do you decide what went through your mind the last time that you had to make a decision about going to a place? All those people had done thinking about it. When we recruit, we make sure people have done a lot of thinking about that purpose. I actually talk to people before I do the listening session just to make sure that they're all kosher with this. They have thoughts, they can speak about their thoughts at depth, and they can kind of open up to you, that they're open to building rapport with you. And what happened there was we found that people are taking so much time figuring out what it takes to get there, that once they finally get, you know, they're using kayak or they're using the airline site or whatever, and like just pouring a bunch of different options in, racking their brains for like a different airport I could go into, where, you know, if I've got to visit these 2 clients or something, do I go to the airport in the middle and drive a car back and forth, or do I go to one and then take the bus over there? You know, all these kinds of logistics stuff that that actually they have data to solve and help people with. So it was really interesting. What happened when we did that one was we then did it again for people going on vacation. And then based on those 2 things, what we did was, let's look at people who are, we had these thinking styles come out of it. And one of them was just get me there. And so these were people who would compress the amount of time that it took to get from point A to point B, including ground travel. And so we used that to say, well, let's talk to a bunch of people about what went through their mind as they were trying to get to that gate, trying to get on board, right? Trying to make sure that they physically get themselves from wherever they are to that plane, that tin can that's going to take off in the air. As one person called it, the bus in the sky. And so that led to more things that we wanted to find out. Now, this is super compressed. We did 8 studies where it should have been 8 years. We did it like in 16 months, really not common. But it really showed how one set of data leads to finding another set of data, or something else that we wanted to explore. We kept saying, hey, we need to explore people with accessibility, you know, disabilities. And we could never like focus our research on it because we kept getting, you know, the business people saying, no, let's do this. And we had a relationship. It is a give and take. Anyway, so those are just a couple of examples. I did one super esoteric one for a company that wanted to help young women build self-confidence. And you're like, oh God, what's the purpose there? Like, how can you ask somebody, well, what went through your mind the last time you built self-confidence? So what we did was we selected something, some purpose that took self-confidence to achieve. And that purpose was personal identity change. And we went and we spoke to 10 or 11 people about everything that went through their mind at depth the last time, the time. It's not like you do that frequently, that they changed their personal identity. And it was fascinating what came out of that. Turns out the company that commissioned that information, they're like, okay, great. We're going to ignore those two thinking styles because there's no way we can deal with that right now. We're just going to focus on this thinking style, but we know that they're out there and we're just going to focus on this part. But next, we're going to do that next part. So it was really, those are some examples, if that helps.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just also wondering, like, when do you think you discovered purpose? Like you were speaking about patterns emerging, and like how many people have to say something to say this is a pattern?
Yeah, how many people need to say something? So because what I'm doing is I'm going into a transcript and I'm saying, there are a bunch of concepts here. And the concepts are either inner thinking or an emotional reaction or a guiding principle or a bunch of those other things that surface, which we kind of have to get context. But I'm just going to grab out those three types of things. When then I summarize each one of those and start looking across different people, the focus of mental attention is where I find the patterns. So what I'm doing is I'm asking, this person has a focus of mental attention that's really similar, just, brief, right? It might be, I'm on my way to the airport and part of the thing that I like to do is fly in the morning. And part of that is that I need to get coffee and I hate the plain coffee. So I always have to get coffee in the airport. Or maybe a different one is I bring coffee with me from home. So that's like a little focus of mental attention about the coffee. And setting myself up for some sort of an enjoyable morning or waking myself up to be able to do work on the plane, that kind of a thing. So I look for the other people who have been focused on that same sort of a thing. It doesn't have to be coffee, but it has to be that same sort of a sub-purpose. Number of patterns, I would love to see at least 2 or 3 or 4 people saying the same thing, since my data sets are very small. The number of participants are very small. That's okay. I tend to ask the data itself how many patterns it has. So sometimes it's like 4 people and it's a really strong pattern. Sometimes it's 8 people and it's a really strong pattern. It depends on the frame that we've put around it and the people that we've recruited as well. So there's framing and recruiting is super important. And I think researchers know that, but for some reason we're like, you're pushing me too fast. So anyway.
I have to jump in again a bit. We're actually already beyond the official buffer time even for this one. But well, if you still want to catch something of Jeff, I think it's still ongoing, but we can still continue here. It seems very fruitful. What's your opinion?
Records for the sessions of Jeff afterwards, or do you know that? Or so it's actually pretty late already.
I'm not totally sure about that, to be honest, because we didn't ask Jeff about that yet. We're sharing it. We're just recording it in case. Yeah.
Okay.
It's called.
Okay, so there's an opportunity at least.
Say what?
There's an opportunity at least that it will be somehow available, maybe.
Definitely.
With a smiley face on his face also.
Okay, that's great. There was kind of sidetrack discussion here, but this was not so much more about examples, but it went back to what is a purpose, more or less, I think. And we have Vitaly was asking something here in the end. Vitaly, are you still there? Do you want to join, maybe? He was asking for Daniel, what's your take on moving an organization away from researching things to death? Okay. Depends on how you read it. To death without executing and taking ages to do so, instead of creating pragmatic research that leads to actions. What's your take on moving an organization away from researching things to death without executing and taking ages to do so, instead of creating pragmatic research that leads to actions? Daniel, you're muted again. You cannot unmute this mic for everyone. No, still not working. No. No. Okay.
Maybe, you know how his camera, he was saying that he had that workaround where it wouldn't shut off after 30 minutes. Maybe his microphone shuts off.
Yeah. Could be.
Dang it. Gotta love his camera, though. That's a pretty nice one. I feel much better now that all of us on camera just have like the normal. There we go.
There he is.
Okay.
Say something.
It won't.
Now it works.
Really?
Now we're back. Yeah.
It wasn't. Anyway, it wasn't connecting to my mic. I mean, I get the question, Vitaly, but I mean, I would skew them towards working on testing things like actual prototypes away from, if it's really hard to get them into actual production, at least you could go start testing high fidelity prototypes. And that's one step removed from throwing, an army of developers at a task. But I mean, this is just what I would try, but I can't say I've been in your position. I've always been in teams that are high execution. Maybe indies run into this problem more of teams that just churn on research.
That was a good lob, Daniel.
I didn't mean throwing you under the bus. I just don't know the answer.
I actually haven't run into it as much because the people who reach out to me self-select, right?
They're paying you money to solve that problem.
So I don't get to see that part of it. It's as a consultant, it's kind of hard to see the whole thing. So I rely on the people who come to my courses to tell me more detail about what the situations they're in. And that's, I listen enough over the years that it becomes patterns. But I don't have that kind of depth to answer that.
That's all right.
Yeah.
This is it.
Join a different organization.
Exactly. I just did some really.
I inspired to do it.
Yeah, I just did some research with founders last year, and it was really fun because I got to ask them that question: what keeps you up at night? And it was pretty broad, but we got so many patterns. We did a very specific recruit, though, because we wanted to understand discrimination in the life of a founder who is also hunting or has just hunted for money, investment money. So that was really interesting to see what kind of
problem there.
Not at all.
Oh my God.
I know, right? It was really fun. Yeah. So, but interestingly enough, that happened right as the pandemic was unfolding, and me and the client, we worked together until June, basically, of last year, looking at where our gaps and weaknesses were, and then crickets, no action on it. because they're dealing with all these founders who were up against crises that they needed to try to help them through. So, you know, it's not data that dies off over time. It's valid. I could hop in a time machine and go ask founders from years ago, and that would be valid data too. So, but I bring this up because a lot of the time this does happen, where you get some of this knowledge, but you get directed in another direction because there's another crisis going on or something else more important. That stuff is still waiting there. We'll get back to it when we have the time to do it.
Well, if we want to talk about a completely different subject, I mean, when you said it's not important, I mean, that's true. I mean, venture capital does not think that diversity, equity are actually important. They're stickers to put on the side of the box to say, hey, we're great. But like, if you look at the dollars at work, so, you know, from a venture fund standpoint, how much money you invest into different founders, they might have improved the diversity of the percentage of people they invest in. So say, you know, now we went from 3%, 4% women to 10%. But that would be a big improvement in venture capital, which is so sad.
Yeah.
Dollars at work, probably still 3%.
Yeah. You know what was interesting? I probably shouldn't talk about findings, but one of the things was it was the process by which they find people to invest in that was terribly broken, terribly broken. Which is where people like Arlen Hamilton come in, and it's like,
Anyway,
so
now we're on a completely different subject. So
now we're on a completely different subject. Exactly, I know.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, this sounds very.
We're done.
I have no idea what venture capital is. Venture capital accumulation. I never went into that, and well, I'm a happy interaction designer since ages now, and I tried a little bit into a management role, but this just didn't resonate with me, and I stopped going for that actually, and I really enjoy doing things, you know, like getting ahead on stuff and developing new ideas, but all the, let's say, the brain mangling of other people and trying to convince them and getting into the conversations, this was really energy consuming for me. So at some point,
you never power hungry.
Huh?
You're clearly never power hungry.
I have never been power hungry, and yet all of that relationship wrangling, right? It's like, for me, it's surface versus depth, and I can do it. I have the skills to do it. The skills are teachable, and using the use of that skill is doing something, just like you were saying.
Which would bring us probably back to the purpose thing, because your purpose is probably not the power part in that one, but more like you want to surface things from people, like make them realize or get them to a certain point.
I want the team to collaborate.
There's power in that.
I just don't care about that.
Well, shaping a different outcome in the world, there's power in that too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean power to make money. I mean power to shift things.
I should have asked you that. What do you mean by power? That was my bad.
Gets to ask with online.
Yeah, we were just having a discussion about what is truth the other day. So what is power? Let's do that one.
All right. Unfortunately, I need to go.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you very much
leaving too early, right?
for your come again?
I said I'm not leaving too early, right?
No, definitely. We're way above our
we're good.
Projected time. So thank you very much. Very
thank you.
Discussion, and
thanks so much, Indi. And
thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Henning. This was fun. Thank you, everybody in the audience. Bye.
Yeah, everyone. Thank you so much.
See you guys.